Jake Morrison sat in his chair and looked around the big round table. The room was huge, with a ceiling so high he could barely see the top. 47 different types of aliens sat around the table with him. Each one looked completely different from the others. The Zephyrians looked like they were made of glass or crystal. Their skin caught the light from the room and made rainbow colors dance across the walls. When they moved, tiny sparkles of light followed them. Jake thought they were beautiful, but also a little scary. Something that looked so delicate might be more dangerous than it seemed. The Korath were the opposite. They were massive creatures that looked like walking rocks. Their skin was gray and rough like stone. They were so big that their chairs had to be specially made. When they talked, they made deep rumbling sounds that Jake could feel in his chest. The vibrations went through the floor and up into his bones. The Etherean ambassador was the strangest one of all. She was not solid like the others. Instead, she was made of gas that floated inside a special clear box. Her body looked like colored smoke that kept changing from blue to green to purple. Jake wondered how someone made of gas could think or talk, but somehow she managed both. There were dozens of other species around the table. Some looked like giant insects with too many arms and legs. Others looked like plants that had learned to walk. A few looked almost human, but with scales or fur or extra eyes. Each one was stranger than the last. Jake was the only human in the room. He represented Earth and all the people who lived there. The other aliens still thought of humans as new and not very important. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 18 months ago. Most of the other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. The meeting had been going on for 3 hours already. Jake was getting tired of sitting still for so long. His back hurt and his legs felt stiff, but he kept listening and taking notes on his tablet. The other ambassadors were arguing about who should control the outer rim sectors of space. The outer rim was far from the center of the galaxy. It was full of empty space, small planets, and asteroid fields. Most species did not want to live there because it was cold and lonely. But the outer rim also had valuable minerals and rare elements that everyone wanted. Different species kept standing up to make speeches. They talked about their history, their military power, and why they deserved to control the outer rim. Some of them made threats. Others tried to make deals. A few just complained about their enemies. Jake noticed that many of the species did not like each other. The Zephyrians and the Korath had been enemies for centuries. The Etherians thought the insectoids were barbaric. The Draconians looked down on everyone else. Old grudges and new rivalries filled the room with tension. The human ambassador kept quiet and listened. He wrote down important facts on his tablet. He noticed which species were friends and which were enemies. He paid attention to who had the biggest armies and who controlled the most trade routes. All of this information might be useful later. Jake had been trained for this job back on Earth. He had studied every species that belonged to the Galactic Council. He knew their languages, their customs, and their histories. He understood their politics and their military capabilities. The government had spent 2 years preparing him for this position. But even with all his training, Jake still felt out of place. The other ambassadors had been doing this for decades or even centuries. They knew all the unspoken rules and secret agreements. They could read the subtle signs that showed when someone was lying or making a threat. The room fell silent when the Draconian Prime Minister stood up. He was 7 feet tall and covered in scales that changed color depending on his mood. Right now his scales were dark purple, which meant he was serious and possibly angry. His yellow eyes looked around the room, and Jake noticed that many of the smaller species seemed afraid. The Draconians were known throughout the galaxy as warriors. They had never lost a war in their entire recorded history. Their military technology was advanced, and their soldiers were trained from childhood to fight. When a Draconian made a threat, everyone listened. The Prime Minister spoke in a voice that sounded like a snake hissing. His forked tongue flicked out to taste the air between words. This was a sign of aggression among his people. Jake had learned about Draconian body language during his training. The outer rim belongs to those who are strong enough to take it, the Prime Minister said. His voice carried clearly across the huge room. We have gathered a fleet of 200 warships. Any species that wants to fight us for control can try. But know this, we have plans for dealing with each of you. The other ambassadors shifted nervously in their seats. The Korath made deeper, rumbling sounds. The Etherian ambassador's gas form flickered with what looked like worry. Even the plant-like vegans released chemical scents at the translation. System said meant fear. Jake looked up from his tablet. The Draconian's threat did not surprise him. He had expected something like this. The Draconians always used military force to solve their problems. It was their way. What did surprise Jake was how scared the other species seemed. Did they really have no way to defend themselves? Or were they just not used to someone being so direct about their intentions? The human ambassador thought about his own species. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire planets. They had strategies for every type of conflict. If the Draconians wanted to threaten people, humans could play that game too. But Jake was not supposed to start fights. His job was to keep the peace and make friends with other species. Earth wanted to be part of the galactic community, not its enemy. Still, he could not let the Draconians think that humans were weak or helpless. Jake set down his tablet and looked directly at the Draconian Prime Minister. His voice was calm and casual when he spoke. He did not sound worried or angry. He sounded like someone making ordinary conversation. Oh, contingency plans? Jake said. That's interesting. We have those too. The simple words seemed to cut through all the tension in the room. Every eye, sensor, and strange alien appendage turned to look at the human ambassador. The silence that followed was complete and somehow more frightening than all the previous threats had been. The silence in the room lasted for what felt like forever. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Every alien in the room was staring at him with whatever they used for eyes. Some had regular eyes like humans. Others had compound eyes, like insects. A few had glowing orbs or crystal sensors. All of them were focused on him. The Etherian ambassador was the first to speak. Her gas form flickered from blue to yellow, which Jake knew meant she was curious, but also worried. When she talked, her voice came through speakers in her containment box. It sounded like wind blowing through leaves. Contingency plans, Ambassador Morrison? She asked. Do you mean plans for territorial disputes like this one? Jake looked around the room again. He seemed genuinely surprised that everyone was paying so much attention to him. He had just made a simple comment. Why did everyone look so concerned? Well, not just territorial disputes, he said. He picked up his tablet and scrolled through some files. We have comprehensive contingency plans for every species that is here today. It's just normal procedure back on Earth. The Zephyrian delegates. Crystal skin changed from its normal clear color to bright orange. Jake had studied their color language during his training. Orange meant confusion and worry. The Zephyrian leaned forward in his chair, and light scattered in all directions from his movements. You have military plans against all of us? The Zephyrian asked. His voice sounded like bells ringing, but there was a sharp edge to it now. But Earth has only been a member of the Council for less than 2 years. How could you have developed such plans so quickly? Jake looked down at his tablet again. He scrolled through more files, as if he was just checking his daily schedule. His casual attitude was making the other ambassadors more nervous, not less. "Oh, these are not just military plans," Jake said. He looked up and smiled in a friendly way. "Though those are included, of course. We have economic plans, diplomatic plans, psychological plans, biological plans, and technological plans. We tried to think of pretty much every angle we could." The rumbling sound from the Korath delegation stopped completely. The sudden silence from their section of the room was somehow more disturbing than their constant noise had been. Their ambassador was a huge creature with 6 arms and skin that looked like living rock. He leaned forward, and Jake could see tiny gems embedded in his stone-like skin. "You speak of biological plans, human," the Korath said. His voice was deep and slow, like rocks grinding together. "Explain what you mean by this." Jake looked genuinely puzzled by the strong reaction he was getting. He had just stated a simple fact. Why was everyone so upset about it? "Well, for your species specifically," Jake said, looking at the Korath ambassador, "we have identified 17 different chemical compounds that could disrupt your silicon-based metabolism. Nothing deadly, of course. We are not trying to kill anyone. Just something that would make you unable to fight if we needed to stop you." He paused and seemed to think about something. Then he added in a helpful tone, "Though we do have deadly options available if the situation required them." The draconian prime minister's scales shifted from dark purple to bright red. Jake had learned that red scales meant either rage or fear, sometimes both. The prime minister's yellow eyes were fixed on Jake with an intensity that would have frightened most people. "How could you possibly have developed such specific plans so quickly?" the draconian hissed. His forked tongue flicked out more rapidly now, tasting the air for signs of deception or threat. "Oh, we did not develop them quickly," Jake said. He looked down at his tablet and then back at the draconian. "We started working on them about 6 months before we made first contact with any of you. Actually, we had basic plans for theoretical alien species going back about 60 years. We just had to adapt them once we met everyone." The room exploded into chaos. The Etherian ambassador's gas form turned bright red and began swirling violently inside her containment box. The Zephyrian delegate's crystal skin flickered through dozens of colors so fast it looked like a light show. The Korath delegation began rumbling so loudly that the floor shook and several smaller species had to grab their chairs to keep from falling. The insectoid ambassador clicked his mandibles together in rapid bursts. The plant-like vegan delegate released clouds of chemical scents that made the air smell like rotting flowers. Even the energy-based gaseous delegate began flickering and sparking. Inside his containment field, Jake watched all of this with interest. He had expected some reaction, but not quite this much. He made a mental note to include this information in his report back to Earth. The alien species seemed more emotionally volatile than the psychologists had predicted. The Council's mediator finally raised one of his many tentacles for silence. The Arbiter was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy. No one knew exactly what species he belonged to, or even if he was still the same species he had been born as. His body was a strange mix of organic and mechanical parts that had been added over thousands of years of life. When the Arbiter spoke, his voice appeared directly in everyone's mind. He did not use sound waves like most species. Instead, he used some kind of telepathic field that could reach any thinking being. His mental voice was old and tired, like someone who had seen too much over too many years. "Ambassador Morrison," the Arbiter said, "these revelations are very disturbing. The Galactic Council operates on principles of mutual trust and cooperation. What you describe sounds like preparation for war against every member species." Jake set down his tablet and looked directly at the Arbiter. He did not seem intimidated by the ancient being's telepathic presence. His voice was respectful, but firm when he answered. "With respect, mediator, that is not how we see it," Jake said. "On Earth, we have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We would much rather be friends with everyone in this room. But history has taught us that friendships can change." A vegan delegate released more chemical scents. The translation system worked for a moment before announcing that the chemicals meant distress and confusion. When the vegan spoke, his voice sounded like leaves rustling in the wind. "You speak of friendship while simultaneously planning our destruction," the vegan said. "This seems contradictory to us. How can you claim to want peace while preparing for war?" Jake thought about this question for a moment. He could see that the other species were genuinely confused by human behavior. Maybe they really did not understand how humans thought about these things. "Is it contradictory?" Jake asked. "The Draconians just announced that they have contingency plans for dealing with everyone here. Nobody seems surprised by that. The difference is that we are being honest about our plans." The Draconian Prime Minister's scales rippled with what looked like anger. His voice became even more hissing and dangerous when he spoke. "Our plans are military in nature, as fits our warrior." "Culture," the Draconian said. "You speak of biological weapons, psychological manipulation, and economic warfare. These are the tools of assassins and terrorists, not honorable soldiers." For the first time since the meeting began, Jake's expression became less friendly. His eyes hardened slightly, and his voice took on a colder tone. "No, Prime Minister," Jake said. "These are the tools of a species that has spent most of its existence fighting itself. We have had thousands of years to perfect every possible way to defeat an enemy. When we finally reached the stars and found out we were not alone, did you really think we would just forget everything we had learned?" The aquatic delegate spoke up from inside his water-filled suit. His voice came through speakers that made everything sound like he was talking underwater. Bubbles rose constantly through the clear liquid that surrounded him, and Jake could see gills opening and closing on the sides of his neck. "But this suggests that you view us all as potential enemies," the aquatic said. "We have done nothing to threaten Earth or humanity. Why would you prepare to fight us?" Jake looked at the aquatic delegate with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the meeting. He did not seem angry or defensive. He spoke like someone explaining something obvious to a child. "We do not view you all as potential enemies," Jake said. "We view you all as potential anything. Enemies, allies, trading partners, subjects for study. The universe is a very big place, and we have learned not to make assumptions about anyone's long-term intentions." The hive mind representative spoke through one of their drone bodies. The drone looked like a human-sized ant with too many eyes and arms. When it talked, it made clicking and chittering sounds that the translation system had to work hard to convert into words. "A human speaks of studying us," the hive mind said. "What have you learned from this study?" Jake picked up his tablet again and scrolled through several files. He seemed to be looking for something specific. When he found it, he looked up at the hive mind drone with interest. "Well, for instance," Jake said, "we know that your hive mind communication operates on quantum entanglement frequencies. If we disrupted those frequencies, your collective consciousness would fragment into millions of individual minds with no coordination. It would be like millions of people suddenly waking up in the same body with no idea how they got there." The drone's compound eyes focused on Jake with an intensity that made him seem like the most important thing in the universe. The clicking sounds it made became faster and more agitated before the translation came through. "That knowledge is classified at the highest levels of our government," the hive mind said. "How do you possess such information?" Jake shrugged like it was not important. "We observed your behavior patterns. We analyzed your communication methods. We tested theories through computer simulations. We ran probability calculations on various scenarios. It is what we do." The crystalline delegate, who had been silent up to this point, produced a sound that was like breaking glass mixed with wind chimes. The translation system identified it as barely controlled panic. "What else do you know about us?" The crystalline asked. Jake looked around the room at all the different species. Each one was watching him with whatever they used for eyes. The tension in the room was so thick, he could almost feel it pressing against his skin. "Do you really want to know?" Jake asked. "Because once I start talking about this, there is no going back. You might not like what you hear." The Arbiter's telepathic voice reached everyone's mind at the same time. "Ambassador Morrison, I believe the Council needs to understand the full scope of what Earth has prepared. Please continue." Jake nodded and looked down at his tablet again. He scrolled through more files, and everyone in the room could see that there were many, many documents stored on his device. "All right," Jake said. "We know that Zephyrian crystal skin can be shattered by specific sonic frequencies. We tested this in computer simulations after studying recordings of your people speaking and moving. The frequency that would work best is about 14,000 hertz, maintained for approximately 30 seconds. The Zephyrian delegate's crystal skin flickered through several colors before settling on a pale, sickly green. This was a color that Jake had never seen in his studies of their species. It might have been a new emotion entirely. We know that Etherian gas-form beings can be contained indefinitely using electromagnetic fields, tuned to your specific molecular structure," Jake continued. "Your people are made of a very specific type of plasma that responds to certain electromagnetic frequencies. Control the field, control the being." The Etherian ambassador's gas form began swirling faster inside her. Containment box. She was clearly agitated, but there was nothing she could do about it. She was already trapped in exactly the kind of container Jake was describing. "We know that Korath regeneration can be stopped by introducing certain rare Earth elements into your environment," Jake said, looking at the massive stone-like beings. "Your species can heal from almost any injury, but only if your body can process the right minerals. Cut off those minerals, and you become as fragile as any other species." The Korath delegation's rumbling became much quieter. They were clearly disturbed by how much the humans knew about their biological processes. Jake turned to the Draconian Prime Minister. "We know that Draconian scales are vulnerable to a particular type of acid that is abundant on 3 planets in human space. Your scales can stop most weapons, but this acid dissolves them in seconds. We have enough of this acid in storage to treat several thousand rounds of ammunition." The Prime Minister's scales had turned a color that Jake had never seen before. It was somewhere between yellow and white, and it made the Draconian look sick. "We know that aquatic delegates can be forced into hibernation by adjusting water temperature and salinity in very precise ways," Jake said, looking at the water-filled suit. "Your species evolved in very specific ocean conditions. Change those conditions just slightly, and your body shuts down to protect itself." The aquatic delegate's gills were moving much faster now, and more bubbles were rising through his water. He was clearly having trouble breathing. "We know that vegan plant species can be affected by modified viruses that target your chlorophyll equivalent compounds," Jake said. "Without the ability to process sunlight, your people would starve in a matter of days." The vegan delegate released a cloud of chemical scents that made the entire room smell like a garden that was dying. The translation system identified the smell as terror. Jake looked around the room at all the shocked faces. Some species were making sounds of distress. Others were completely silent. A few looked like they were trying to figure out how to leave the room without seeming to run away. "But this is just the biological information," Jake said. "We also know about your economies, your political systems, your military capabilities, your trade routes, your resource dependencies, your technological limitations, your social structures, your religious beliefs, and your cultural weaknesses. The insectoid delegate's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like a machine gun. You have been spying on all of us. This is an act of war. Not spying exactly, Jake said. Most of this information is available to the public if you know where to look and how to analyze it. Your own databases, your cultural exchange programs, your scientific publications, your trade agreements, your diplomatic communications. We just put it all together in ways that most species do not think to do. The fungal delegate, who looked like a giant mushroom with arms and legs, released spores that the translation system identified as complete confusion. But why? The fungal asked. Why would you go to such lengths to gather this information? What is the purpose? Jake looked genuinely surprised by the question. He seemed to think the answer was obvious. Because we are human, he said. This is what humans do. We gather information. We analyze it. We prepare for different scenarios. We make plans. It is how we think. The gaseous delegate, who was made of pure energy contained in a special field generator, began flickering rapidly. These plans you have made, how detailed are they? Jake checked his tablet again. Very detailed. For instance, if we needed to neutralize the gaseous collective, we have 3 primary options available to us. He looked up at the energy being. First, we could use an electromagnetic pulse to disrupt your containment fields. Second, we could introduce specific particle types that would cause your energy matrix to destabilize. Third, we could simply cut off your access to the cosmic background radiation that you feed on. The gaseous delegate's flickering became more erratic. And each of these options would result in our destruction? Not necessarily, Jake said. Each option has multiple sub-variations depending on the circumstances, the timeline, and the desired outcome. We have non-lethal versions that would just incapacitate you. We have relocation versions that would force you to leave an area. We have... He paused and seemed to consider his words carefully. We have other options as well, but I would prefer not to discuss those unless absolutely necessary. The room had become completely silent, except for the hum of the life support systems. Even the Arbiter seemed to be stunned by the scope of human preparation. Finally, the ancient mediator spoke into everyone's mind. Ambassador Morrison, how long did it take your species to develop all of these plans? Jake thought about the question. The basic framework was developed over about 18 months. But we have been refining and updating the plans constantly since then. Every time we learn something new about any of your species, we update the relevant contingency plans. And how many people on Earth know about these plans? The Arbiter asked. The specific details are classified, Jake said. But the basic concept is well known. Most humans assume that their government has prepared for various scenarios involving alien contact. They would be surprised if we had not made such plans. The Etherian ambassadors gasfo. Jake set his tablet down on the table and looked directly at the ancient mediator. It is simple logic. If you know exactly how to defeat someone, you also know exactly how to avoid fighting them. Every weakness we identify in your species is also a strength we can help you protect. Every vulnerability we discover is something we can help you fix. The Korath delegate rumbled in confusion. This makes no sense. Why would you help us become stronger if you are planning to fight us? Because we do not want to fight you, Jake said. Fighting is expensive. Fighting is dangerous. Fighting is unpredictable. We would much rather trade with you, learn from you, and work together on projects that benefit everyone. The draconian Prime Minister's scales were still that sickly yellow-white color. But if you prefer peace, why make such detailed plans for war? Jake looked at the draconian with something that might have been pity. Because not everyone prefers peace. Some species solve their problems through violence. Some species see cooperation as weakness, Some species cannot be trusted to keep their agreements. He gestured around the room. Look at this meeting. We are here because different species want to control the same territory. The Draconians just threatened everyone with their fleet of warships. Half the species in this room have been at war with each other at some point in history. Do you really think we should enter this environment without any preparations? The vegan delegate released chemicals that smelled like fresh flowers. The translation system identified this as a sign of understanding. So you make these plans as a form of insurance? Exactly, Jake said. We hope we never need to use any of these plans. But if someone forces us to defend ourselves, we want to be ready. The hive mind drone clicked rapidly. But some of the plans you described sound like they could cause permanent damage or death. How is this defensive? Jake picked up his tablet again and scrolled through several files. Every plan has multiple levels of response. Level 1 is always diplomatic. We try to solve problems through talking and negotiation. Level 2 is economic. We use trade agreements, sanctions, or other financial pressures. Level 3 is technological. We might restrict access to certain technologies or information. He looked up at the hive mind drone. Level 4 is where we start using more direct methods. But even then, we prefer non-lethal approaches when possible. The more extreme options are only for situations where our survival is at stake. The crystalline delegate produced a sound like wind chimes in a storm. What would it take for you to reach those extreme levels? Jake thought about this question carefully. It would take a lot. We would need to believe that our entire species was threatened with extinction. We would need to have tried every other option first. We would need to be absolutely certain that there was no other way to protect ourselves. The Etherian ambassador's gas form was swirling more slowly now. And if you were forced to implement these plans, what would be the result? That depends on the specific plan and the circumstances, Jake said. Some plans would just disable your military capabilities. Others would disrupt your economy or your government. A few would force you to relocate to different territories. He paused and looked around the room. But there are some plans that would be much more severe. Plans that we hope we never have to use. The aquatic delegate's gills were moving rapidly. What is the most severe plan you have developed? Jake was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be deciding whether to answer the question. Finally, he looked directly at the aquatic delegate. The most severe plan assumes that multiple species have united to destroy humanity completely, Jake said. It assumes that diplomatic, economic, and technological responses have all failed. It assumes that we are facing total extinction. The room became completely silent. Every species was waiting to hear what the humans would do in such a situation. In that scenario, Jake continued, we would probably activate what we call the stellar engineering protocol. The fungal delegate released spores that created a cloud around his body. What is the stellar engineering protocol? Jake looked down at his tablet and back at the fungal delegate. We would convert our sun into a weapon. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the electrical hum of the translation systems. No one moved. No one made any sound. Even the arbiter seemed stunned. The gaseous delegate was the first to speak. You would destroy your own star? Only if we absolutely had to, Jake said. And we would give everyone in the solar system plenty. OF warning to evacuate. We are not trying to commit genocide. We are trying to survive. The Korath delegate's rumbling was barely audible. But you would die too. Some of us would, Jake admitted. But we have colonies in 17 different star systems now. About 60% of our population lives off-world. We would survive as a species, even if Earth was destroyed. The Draconian Prime Minister's scales had turned completely white. And what would happen to the rest of the galaxy? Jake looked At his tablet again. Our computer models suggest that converting soul into a weapon would have widespread effects. The energy release would be visible from thousands of light years away. The gravitational disruption would affect nearby star systems. The electromagnetic pulse would disable most electronic systems within a 50 light-year radius. He looked up at the Draconian. Our projections suggest that even if we lost the war, we would reduce the total galactic population by approximately 30% and set back technological development by several centuries. The vegan delegate released chemicals that made the air smell like a forest fire. This would be genocide on a galactic scale. It would be a side effect of our defensive measures, Jake corrected. We would not be trying to kill anyone. We would just be trying to protect ourselves in the most effective way possible. The insectoid delegate's mandibles were clicking so fast, they sounded like static. You would destroy half the galaxy to save yourselves? We would defend ourselves using whatever means necessary, Jake said. But remember, this is only the most extreme scenario. It assumes that every other option has failed. It assumes that multiple species are actively trying to wipe out humanity. The Etherian ambassador's gas form had turned a deep red color. How likely do you think it is that such a scenario would occur? Jake thought about this question. Not very likely. Most species are reasonable. Most conflicts can be resolved through negotiation. Most problems have solutions that do not require violence. He looked around the room at all the worried faces. But the possibility exists. And if it ever became reality, we want to be prepared. A hive mind drone clicked once, very slowly. These preparations you have made, do they include scenarios where individual species attack Earth? Of course, Jake said. We have specific plans for dealing with each species represented in this room. We have plans for dealing with combinations of species working together. We have plans for dealing with species we have not met yet. The crystalline delegate produced a sound like breaking glass. How many different scenarios have you prepared for? Jake scrolled through his tablet for a moment. The current database contains 2,847 different scenarios. Each scenario has multiple sub-variations depending on the specific circumstances involved. In total, we have detailed plans for over 15,000 different possible situations. The room erupted. In chaos again. Species were making sounds of alarm, fear, and anger. The Korath delegation was rumbling so loudly that dust fell from the ceiling. The Etherian ambassador's gas form was swirling violently. Even the ancient arbiter seemed shaken by the scope of human. Preparation. Jake waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. I know this sounds like a lot, but you have to understand that this is just how humans think. We plan for everything. We prepare for every possibility. It is not because we want bad things to happen. It is because we want to be ready if they do happen. The Arbiter's telepathic voice cut through the remaining chaos. Ambassador Morrison, these revelations are deeply troubling. No species in the history of the Galactic Council has ever admitted to such comprehensive preparation for conflict. Jake looked directly at the ancient mediator. With respect, Arbiter, maybe that is why there have been so many wars in galactic history. Maybe if more species prepared properly for conflict, there would be less actual fighting. The Draconian Prime Minister leaned forward. His scales were still white, but there was something different in his posture now. Explain this logic, human. It is simple, Jake said. If everyone knows that attacking you will be extremely expensive and painful, they are much less likely to attack you. If everyone knows that you can defend yourself effectively, they will try to solve problems through negotiation instead of violence. He gestured toward the Draconian. You announced that you have plans for dealing with everyone here. That was supposed to intimidate people into backing down. But what if everyone knew that attacking you would cost them more than they could possibly gain? What if everyone knew that even if they won, The victory would be so expensive that it would ruin them? The Korath delegate rumbled thoughtfully. You are suggesting that preparation for war prevents war. I am suggesting that overwhelming preparation for war makes war pointless, Jake said. If your enemy knows exactly how you will respond to every possible attack, and if they know the silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Jake could see that every species in the room was trying to understand what they had just learned. The humans were not just another member of the Galactic Council. They were potentially the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Etherian ambassador was the first to break the silence. Her gas form had settled into a pale blue color that Jake recognized as deep thought. Ambassador Morrison, she said, if humanity is capable of such destruction, why did you join the Galactic Council at all? Why not simply remain isolated and avoid all contact with other species? Jake considered the question carefully. Because isolation is not survival. A species that cuts itself off from the rest of the galaxy will eventually stagnate and die. We need trade, we need new ideas, we need cultural exchange. We need friends. The Draconian Prime Minister's scales had begun to shift from white toward a dark blue color. Jake had studied Draconian color language enough to know that blue meant respect mixed with caution. But if you need friends, the Draconian said, why reveal these plans to us? Why not keep them secret? Jake looked around the room at all the worried faces. Because secrets create suspicion, and suspicion leads to conflict. We would rather have everyone know exactly where they stand with humanity and have them wondering what we might be hiding. The Korath delegate rumbled thoughtfully. You believe that honesty prevents war? I believe that uncertainty causes war, Jake said. When species do not know what their neighbors are capable of, they make assumptions. Often those assumptions are wrong. Wrong assumptions lead to bad decisions, and bad decisions lead to fighting. He gestured around the room. Now you all know exactly what humanity is capable of. You know what would happen if you attacked us. You know what we are prepared to do to defend ourselves. There should be no surprises. The vegan delegate released chemicals that smelled like blooming flowers. The translation system identified this as cautious optimism. So you are saying that by threatening us, you are actually trying to protect us? The vegan asked. Jake shook his head. We are not threatening anyone. We are simply being honest about our capabilities. There is a difference between saying, we will attack you, and saying, we are prepared to defend ourselves if you attack us. The hive mind drone clicked rapidly, but the result is the same. You have made it clear that attacking humanity would be extremely costly. Exactly, Jake said. Which means that reasonable species will not attack humanity. They will try to solve problems through negotiation and compromise. They will look for ways to benefit from cooperation instead of conflict. The crystalline delegate produced a sound like gentle wind chimes. And unreasonable species? Jake's expression became slightly harder. Unreasonable species tend to remove themselves from the galaxy eventually. Either they learn to be reasonable, or they pick fights with people who are better prepared than they expected. The gaseous delegate flickered thoughtfully. You speak as if this is a natural process. It is, Jake said. Throughout human history, the most aggressive and violent groups eventually destroyed themselves or were destroyed by their enemies. The groups that survived were the ones that learned when to fight and when to make peace. The fungal delegate released spores that created a sweet-smelling cloud. And you believe this same process applies to galactic civilization? Jake nodded. The galaxy is just a larger version of the same environment. Species that can cooperate and compromise will thrive. Species that can only solve problems through violence will eventually encounter someone more violent than they are. The insectoid delegate's mandibles clicked slowly. Someone like humanity? Someone like any species that has learned to prepare properly, Jake said. Humanity is not unique in our capacity for violence. We are just more honest about it than most species seem to be. The Arbiter's telepathic voice reached everyone in the room. Ambassador Morrison, what does humanity want from the Galactic Council? Jake picked up his tablet and scrolled through several files before answering. We want trade agreements that benefit everyone involved. We want cultural exchange programs so our people can learn from each other. We want joint research, projects to advance science and technology. We want mutual defense agreements to protect against external threats. He looked up at the Arbiter. We want to be part of a galactic community that is peaceful, prosperous, and secure. The Etherian ambassador's gas form swirled gently. And if the Galactic Council cannot provide these things, Jake shrugged, then we will work with the species that can provide them. We will build our own networks of trade and cooperation. We will create our own version of galactic civilization. The aquatic delegates' gills moved rapidly. Even if that means competing with the existing council? Competition is not the same as conflict, Jake said. If the council offers better opportunities, we will work with the council. If individual species offer better opportunities, we will work with them. We will go wherever we can find mutual benefit. The Draconian Prime Minister leaned forward. And if some species try to prevent you from building these relationships? For the first time in the meeting, Jake smiled in a way that was not entirely friendly. Then no species will discover why we spent so much time developing contingency plans. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It was not the shocked silence of species learning something terrifying. It was the thoughtful silence of diplomats reconsidering their strategies. Finally, the Arbiter spoke again. I believe this council needs time to process what we have learned today. I propose we adjourn this session and reconvene tomorrow to discuss our response to the territorial disputes. Jake stood up and gathered his things. That sounds reasonable. Oh, and before I forget, I have an announcement to make. Every species in the room tensed, waiting to hear what other surprise the human might have prepared. Earth's embassy is hosting a barbecue next week, Jake said. All species are invited. We will have food suitable for every metabolism type represented here today. It should be fun. The casual announcement was so unexpected that several species made sounds of confusion. A barbecue? After everything they had just discussed? Jake walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back to face the room. Oh, and just so everyone knows, we are hoping this will become a regular event. We think getting to know each other better is the key to long-term peace and cooperation. The door closed behind him, leaving 46 different species sitting in stunned silence. They had just learned that the most dangerous species in the galaxy was also apparently interested in hosting dinner parties. The Draconian Prime Minister was the first to speak. I withdraw my territorial claims. The Outer Rim can remain neutral space. The Korath delegate rumbled agreement. My people also withdraw our claims. One by one, every species in the room abandoned their territorial disputes. None of them wanted to be the one who started a conflict with humanity over some empty space and asteroid fields. The Arbiter's telepathic voice carried a note of amazement. In 3,000 years of mediating disputes, I have never seen a territorial conflict resolved so quickly. The Etherian ambassador's gas form had turned a bright, cheerful yellow. Perhaps we should ask the humans to attend more of our diplomatic meetings. The vegan delegate released chemicals that smelled like a spring garden. Should we attend this barbecue they mentioned? The crystalline delegate produced a sound like silver bells. I think we should. It might be wise to stay on good terms with them. The gaseous delegate flickered with what seemed like amusement. Besides, I am curious about human food preparation techniques. The fungal delegate released sweet-smelling spores. And I would like to understand more about their culture. Perhaps if we know them better, they will not need to plan for conflicts. With us, the hive mind drone clicked thoughtfully. The human spoke of mutual benefit and cooperation. These concepts intrigue our collective consciousness. The insectoid delegate's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. They prepare for war while planning parties. These humans are the strangest species we have ever encountered. The aquatic delegate's gills moved in a pattern that indicated amusement. Strange, but effective. I noticed that none of us want to fight them. The arbiter's telepathic voice carried undertones of respect. Perhaps that was the point all along. 1 week later, 46 different species attended the barbecue at Earth's embassy. The food was excellent, the conversation was friendly, and everyone had a good time. The potato salad was particularly popular. Even among species that did not normally eat organic matter. Jake spent the evening moving from group to group, making sure everyone felt welcome. He answered questions about human culture, explained various Earth foods, and even taught a few aliens how to play simple human games. Nobody mentioned contingency plans. Nobody talked about weapons or military capabilities. Nobody discussed territorial disputes or trade conflicts. Instead, they talked about art, music, literature, and science. They shared stories about their home worlds and their families. They laughed at each other's jokes and complained about the weather in their respective star systems. By the end of the evening, several species had made plans to visit each other's embassies. Trade agreements were discussed informally over dessert. Research partners,